Hi, and welcome to Smartsheet Simplified. The purpose of this course is to take Smartsheet concepts and break them down into easy, actionable steps that you can use to build efficient and effective Smartsheet solutions. Hi, I'm Ryan Sides. I've been a business process consultant for the last 15 years, helping organizations of various sizes create solutions that are efficient and effective. Through that time, I've been responsible for project management, change management, internal communications, and I've personally trained over 1,000 employees on software solutions. I've used Smartsheet to build project tracking systems, inventory tracking systems, budget tracking systems, and ticket tracking systems, amongst various other solutions. And over that time, I realized that clients were not understanding the fundamentals of Smartsheet. For some reason, they just weren't picking it up. And I know what it's like to have a software just dropped in your lap and be told to learn it. You see, every time I had to train someone on something new, I had to learn the software too. But I didn't just have to learn it for myself, I had to learn it to teach it. Over that time, I learned that not everyone learns the same way. Some people can just read it and get it. Some people have to watch someone else in order to get it. Some people like me have to struggle through it until I understand it and do it myself, and then I get it. This course is designed in such a way that no matter how you learn, you will get Smartsheet. Keep in mind that this isn't a course that's going to teach you every little nuance about Smartsheet. It's a course that's going to teach you the fundamentals that you'll need to build efficient and effective Smartsheet solutions for your organization. This first module is my favorite because we get to dive down into strategy behind creating efficient and effective Smartsheet solutions. This is the exact system that I use with my Smartsheet clients, and it works every single time. Let's go. What better way is there than to start a Smartsheet training in a place other than Smartsheet? So that's where we're going to start. This sheet that you're seeing here is my new project, new client sheet. This is the exact one that I've used so many times to onboard new clients. This is the one that sets up all of my projects for success. And you'll see what I'm talking about as we go through the different phases. This isn't my project plan. I'll develop a separate sheet for my project plan, but this is sort of the brains and where I collect data and where I prep to create the strategy for the project that I'm about to design. So let's dive right into it. Remember, this training is about you having a look at from a consultant's mindset as to how we set up and we create new projects with clients and how to make them successful as well. I think what happens is a lot of times people dive straight into Smartsheet and they just start creating sheets and creating reports and dashboards and have no real mechanism to judge the effectiveness of those Smartsheet assets. And so that's exactly what this is for. All right, first thing at the top, really simple, client summary. We've got a client name, client email, client phone, business name, website. If you're creating projects internally in your organization, you may not need this section. Then we have the background. So what the background section is for is if I've never met you before, if I'm not aware of your organization and what it does and the purpose of what you're trying to accomplish, that's what the background's for. So we start out at the 30,000 foot view. I just simply ask, what is it that you do as a company? What do you do? Do you build residential buildings? Do you manage real estate? Do you create biotech inventions? This gives me an idea of what you do at a very high level. For you, you may want to ask at a 30,000 foot view what the organization you're building your Smartsheet solution for actually does, if you're not already in that organization. All right, so then we get down to the immediate problem. So what's the immediate thing that we're trying to solve? Usually this is something very specific that they want to dive right into. It's, we don't track our projects well enough, or we have tickets that come in and we have no idea who's working on them, or we're managing everything out of our inbox. That's a big one. So the immediate problem is, what are they looking to solve right now? What's their biggest headache right now? The current solution, how are they managing this problem today? Is it in their email inbox? Are they managing things on Excel? I want to get a feel for where they're coming from, because that also gives me an idea of what assets we have to play with. So if they're managing things in Excel, can I use those Excel documents to bring them into Smartsheet and create new Smartsheet sheets off of Excel documents? Or do I need to create everything from scratch and pass it by them for approval? Or do they have some kind of process currently that's working? Or that's working but needs to be improved? All right, team members, I want to find out who they are, and not only who they are, but what their role is in the organization and what their role is going to be in the project. So this team member section usually gets pretty long, but I want to know all of those people because I want to know who I'm working with and I want to know who I need to talk to gather information from. Approval or buy-in, do they need any kind of approval outside of the people that I'm talking to on the phone or on the Zoom call? And what's the timeline? Everybody thinks that they want this thing yesterday, but we need to be realistic about what timeline we create. So is this timeline going to be 6 months from now? Is it 3 months from now? Is it something that we need a quick turnaround in just a 2-week time period? What's the timeline? So what this does is this allows us to back plan from that goal, right? So if I get a 6-month timeline, then I'm going to back plan from 4 months out of those 6 months and say, okay, I need to be live, or I need to be ready to be live on that 4th month. So that way, if there's any slide, if there's any scope creep, I have some leeway to handle that. Communication cadence. So as I'm going through some of these motions and I'm creating assets in Smartsheet or I'm collecting data from them, I need to know what kind of availability they have for me. You're going to need to know the same thing from your team as well. So if you can establish some kind of communication cadence up front, is it going to be a weekly meeting, bi-weekly, every couple of days? Then it sets the baseline for everybody to know that this is a project that's serious, that we need to work on together as a team. And here's how we're going to accomplish it over this timeline. And then I just talked really high level about any risk that could derail a project. It could be a loss of funding. So for instance, if it's a governmental organization, is there any risk that they're going to drop their funding and cancel this project? Other risks would be if it's an office, do they have any other projects that are going to step over this project or become a higher priority if we don't get this one done quickly? So conversations around risk in your own organization is going to help, again, everybody to understand that this is a serious project that everyone needs to work towards. All right, so after the background, let's jump into the phase. First phase that we're going to talk about is a scope, definition, and current design. This gives me an idea of what they have currently. Even though we talked about it in the background, I want to deep dive further into their current design. And then I also want to define specifically what problems we're trying to solve and what we're going to create at the end of it. So for the first one, we're just defining the problem. So this gives me detailed insight into the current problem that they're trying to solve. And this also tells me how large of a problem this is for that organization. What's their current solution? So we walked through that in the background, but I also want to walk through it here as well, just to reiterate that I understand what their current solution is, and then also what problems they have with that current solution. So for instance, if they're managing things in email, then I know from history that typically people drop the ball when it's managed through email. Typically, the original requester is not updated with any project status or any status of their request if it's managed through email until it's actually done. And so are those also problems that they're looking to solve? And then I want to know why Smartsheet. So a lot of people get into Smartsheet thinking that it's Excel on steroids, and it's so much more than that. You can manage every department within your organization. Every department can benefit from a Smartsheet solution. So I want to find out why they have Smartsheet. Is it because the folks that I'm working with, are they part of an enterprise client that already has Smartsheet and they're just looking to bring it on? Is it somebody that doesn't have Smartsheet yet, but they're interested in it, or they're just bought a new license and are trying to learn it and want to create, an amazing solution? What's their end goal or the result that they're expecting? So I use my magic wand question on this one. So if I could wave my magic wand and create one thing that would solve the majority of your problems, what would that look like? And I have them tell that back to me, because while we've talked about the problem, we've talked about the current solution, I want to know what they're thinking and what direction they want to go. Do they want to create 1,000 sheets? Do we want to track projects within Smartsheet and each project has 10 sheets associated with it, along with its own client dashboard and its own project dashboard? What are we actually talking about? What are they thinking in their head is going to be the solution for this? And then is there anything specifically out of scope? So I asked this question because we can get really advanced with some of our solutions. We can integrate with their ERP system, with QuickBooks. We can integrate with some of their other software systems. But if those things are not part of this project, then I need to know specifically, because as I go through the rest of this, I'm going to think around, how am I going to develop the best solution for them? What's that going to look like? But if there are things that I cannot include, then I want to make sure I do that in my solution. Again, what's the timeline? What are we specifically looking at doing? How soon do we need to get this thing done? We asked that in the background, but this time we're going to solidify it a little bit more and define our timeline, define our budget. So if your organization is working with a particular budget and you're working with a consultant, we need to be aware of what those budgets are, so that way we know how much of this we can get done in what period of time. So if you tell me that you have a $30,000 budget, then I know that I can front load that $30,000 budget and get a lot of the work done, and maybe keep a piece of it for the back end in case there are some other additional scope creep items that come up. Am I going to be working with you directly or including other members of your team? The reason I ask this question is because it gets them to think about who the team they have around them is going to be, if they haven't already defined that. A lot of times working with one person can be a bottleneck, but if I can work with a team of people, and if you can work with a team of people, then you'll be much more successful in your project, if you can manage expectations of all the team members. Who will have access to Smartsheet via license or via no license? In this case, if you have contractors, for instance, that you're wanting to have access to Smartsheet, it depends on what their end goal is here. But if you have things like contractors or external third parties that you want to bring into Smartsheet, we'll have discussions around what type of license does that company need? Are they just going to access a dashboard? Can that dashboard be public facing? Do they actually need a license in this case? So we'll walk through each one of those scenarios. Are they going to need any training documents or videos at the end of this project? So for very small scope projects, we're creating maybe a project template. We're rolling out maybe an inventory tracking system. Recording a little 5-minute video on how the thing works is super quick and super easy to do. Now, if we're rolling out a control center implementation, which is going to spin up new projects for them, and they're going to have administrators working in Control Center as well as working in Smartsheet. If they're going to have some of the other premium apps, then what I like to do is record videos that explain each one of those apps and how they work in their environment. Because I can go look and see how those apps work generally, but if I can explain to them in their environment how this is going to work, then it's much more meaningful. It's much more impactful to their job. So you want to find out if you need training documents or videos at the end of your project. Something to consider. And then the link to the as-is processes. So it depends on the size of the project, but typically projects of medium or a larger scope, I'm going to require that we walk through their as-is processes, and I map them out in Lucidchart. You can map them out in Visio or PowerPoint or on a whiteboard, however you want to do it. I like Lucidchart because it's easy to use and it's shareable. So once I'm done developing the chart, then I can send it off to the team and get the team to review it. And then they can make any adjustments along the way, and I can see what changes have been made. So I'll create another video for you on Lucidchart later on in the course. And then how are we going to evaluate success at the end of the day? At the end of this project, I need to know if we were successful or not. So what does that, are we going to track KPIs, for instance? Are we going to measure the turnaround time for maybe processing a ticket? If we're creating a ticketing system, are we going to measure the amount of time that they spend managing a project? Are we going to manage or track the amount of time that someone takes to contact the accounting department to understand if an invoice has been paid? What specifically does success look like, and how are we going to evaluate that? All right, so that's phase 1, scope definition and current design. Phase 2. So this is where I house a lot of my to-be processes. So we've talked about the as-is process. We've talked about how things are today, and we've documented those processes. But now this is where I record what things are going to look like going forward in Smartsheet. So for me, I want a high-level description of what this solution is going to look like. Are we creating a Control Center rollout with project files that are going to get rolled into blueprints in Control Center, and we're going to spin out clients and spin out projects? So what's that high-level definition of what we're creating? We're creating an inventory system, an inventory that system that tracks barcodes, incoming and outgoing inventory that gets updated by different projects. What are we creating? Are we working from existing customer data? So do they have data already stored somewhere that we need to import into Smartsheet? And if so, that's going to drive how I create a lot of my sheets. If they have existing data, we can use that existing data, import it into Smartsheet, and it builds all of our sheets for us for the most part. Then we go in and we tweak things and we add things as we need to. Are we going to start with a template? So does Smartsheet in its control center, in its solution center, have a template that we can start from, that we can work from? Or do I have a template that I've used from prior clients that we can start from and kind of shortcut some of the processes? Because projects typically have the same fields starting out. We've got task name, start date, end date, red, yellow, green, blue indicators, baselines, dependencies, predecessors. We usually have some kind of level column as well to define what level in the hierarchy we're working with. We also have some reporting checkboxes that we'll add in there. So we typically have a template that I'll start from, and I'll just list those out here. Are we going to need a metric sheet? So are we pulling data from multiple sheets into one metric sheet and displaying that data on a dashboard? What's that metric sheet going to look like? Dashboards, how many dashboards are we creating? Who's the audience for the dashboard? Why are we creating it? What level of detail needs to be displayed on the dashboard? I will actually have clients draw out for me how they want dashboards to look, or at least give me a listing, a text-based listing of what they want to see on the dashboard. What this does for me is it gives me an idea as to what's important to them. And that way I can make additional recommendations of things they might want to track or things they might want to elevate on their dashboards. What kind of reports do we need to back up our dashboards? And then also what kind of sheets do we need to develop? So if you're brand new to Smartsheet, I'll give you a quick 101 on Smartsheet. Sheets roll up to reports, which can be displayed by themselves or be displayed in dashboards. Dashboards can also get data directly out of sheets without having reports in the mix as well. So our sheet is where we do all of our work. It's where we input data. It's where we manage data. It's where we approve things. And then the report just brings information out of a sheet or out of multiple sheets and brings it all together. Our dashboard is kind of like our window into our data. So we can create charts and graphs. We can put images on our dashboard. We can put links to our data, directly to our data in our sheets on our dashboard. We can display an entire sheet or a sub portion of a sheet on a dashboard. And we can display reports on dashboards as well as a bunch of other stuff. So our dashboard is kind of like our window into our data. And then we have forms. Forms make data entry into sheets really, really easy because we can define the standard format that we want people to enter data in. They're going to enter it on a form and it gets pulled into a sheet and a row is automatically created for us on our sheet. I'll then define any future phases. So if through our discussions with clients over the last few weeks result in, hey, we'd like to do that, but we don't have the budget for that now, or that's not in this current scope, but we do want to do it later on, I'll put that in future phases. So that way it's at least recorded for the client that this was discussed and this is what we decided, and you can do this later in a future phase. Future phases are things like, we want to work on this department now, but we'll work on the next department next, right? Or we want to build an API that's going to bring data out of our reporting system, out of our budgeting system, and bring it into Smartsheet. And then at the end of phase 2, I have a check-in and a sign-off. If I'm not constantly meeting with the client, this is just kind of my indicator that it's time to meet with them to discuss everything that I've written out here. Now we get into the fun stuff, the automations. This is really where Smartsheet shines. Where Smartsheet shines. Because with automations, we can do things like eliminate some mundane tasks. We can send automatic approvals to people. So while we have created our sheets and we've created our dashboards and our reports, now we can layer on automations on top of that and really make this thing nice. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is email notifications and alerts. Who needs to receive a notification or an alert when something happens in Smartsheet? That's all I want them to answer for me. Then we define any email data collection that needs to happen. So for instance, if I'm building a ticketing system and a requester puts in a ticket via form, and that form gets sent over to a sheet and builds a row in that sheet, Now I need to know maybe from my IT department, what's some additional information in order to complete this ticket. So I can send an update request out of Smartsheet to that IT person, and they can tell me what's needed next. They can update it via their email without ever actually going into the sheet. Then if I need to obtain any approvals along the way, there's an approval workflow that we can build in the automations in Smartsheet where it just sends an email off to that approver, and that approver can say yay or nay, and then that'll update the sheet as well without them ever having to go into the sheet. Then do we need a copy from one sheet to another? This depends on the solution that you're building. But if we need to move data from one sheet to another, we can bring that data in from using index match, or we can use data mesh, which is a premium app in Smartsheet. And there's a couple of other ways that we can move data around. But this is the place where I'll define how that data is going to move around. And then do we need to move or copy rows from one sheet to another? This depends on your solution, but if we need to move rows from one sheet to another or copy rows from one sheet to another, I'll go ahead and define that here. So that way I know as I'm building out my solution that I know to come back in and come check on this before I finalize the solution. All right, so that's automations. Phase 4, invite staff and training. What's interesting is that a lot of the projects that I'm brought in on totally forget about the training phase of the project. Everyone is focused on building the vehicle, building the solution, that they forget how to train the people that are actually going to be using it. And so this is a really critical piece from a consulting perspective and from your perspective, building it within your organization, that training has to be considered up front. All right, so who's going to access Smartsheet with a license? We talked about that, kind of a high level overview earlier. Now we're going to get down to the details. What are their names? What are their email addresses? What type of license are they going to have? And then also what's going to be their role in Smartsheet? Who's going to access Smartsheet without a license? We talked through some scenarios of that earlier. And then who's going to be restricted down to certain sheets, reports, and dashboards? Are they going to be restricted down to certain data? Do we need to use Dynamic View, which is another premium app with Smartsheet, to restrict their view of certain sheets? So that's where we record all this information here. This usually comes after we go through the initial build of the solution, and we're talking through a lot of these things. This is kind of a reminder to me to ask these types of questions. Then we get into training and testing. Is there going to be any user acceptance testing? So after we've built all this, the project team on the client side is heavily involved in testing things, looking at things, making sure they're correct. But then does there need to be a more formal layer of user acceptance testing? So do we need to define test criteria, test scenarios? Do we need to track those scenarios? At what level are we going to have a user acceptance testing? And then what type of video training is needed? What type of training documents are needed? And is there going to be an employee training portal? So again, this depends on the scope of your project. If this is a massive scope, then you're going to want training videos. You're going to want training documentation that walk the user step by step through each one of the processes in your solution. And you're going to want a training portal, because if you create a portal, which is just a dashboard with a bunch of links to all of your training materials, then it's going to make it really easy for them to onboard to your new solution. All right, moving into phase 5, the launch phase. So after everything's done, after everything's been tested, everyone's ready to go live with your solution, you need to set a date. It needs to be a date and time where everyone knows that on this date, we will move forward with the solution. What this does is this prevents kind of that soft launch. In most scenarios, I prefer to have a true launch date, and we cut over from what we were doing to now this is what we're going to do from here going forward. We will have internal communications. What types of internal comms do you need? Should there be a weekly newsletter that goes out to the user base to let them know the status of the project, what's coming up, what to get ready for? This falls into that change management of projects. People need to know if their world is going to be changing so they can prepare for that change. Now, again, this depends on the scope of your project, but if it is a massive scope, then you're going to want some type of internal communications going out to your end users, letting them know that change is coming so they can get ready. And then we'll give access to users to Smartsheet assets by sending invitations, adding them to the solution, adding them to the Smartsheet account. This is just that step in the process to get it done. And then again, we talk about success tracking. So we defined success tracking earlier. What are those KPIs that we're going to track to make sure that what we built is actually working, is actually better than what you had? And now we're talking about how we're going to track those things going forward, and start the process of tracking that success, tracking those KPIs. And then along with training, this is the other part of projects that most people will forget, or most people push past, or they push them under the rug and say, it'll take care of itself. This is support. Internal support. What does that look like from your client's perspective, from your organization's perspective? How will they support each other? Are they going to have weekly meetings? Are they going to have drop-in sessions, open office hours once a week for anyone to drop in real time and ask questions? Is there going to be any kind of training, ongoing training that's involved? So this is the place where we're going to discuss all of that internal support and what that's going to look like for your end users. It's also the place to define who's going to be responsible for what from your administrative team. So for your project team, people that have been there, who's going to administer this solution going forward? It's not always the people you work with. All right, and then we talk about follow-up. What does follow-up look like? Are we continuing to send email newsletters out? Are we continuing to send training videos out? What kind of cadence does that look like? And then also from my perspective as a consultant, what kind of follow-up am I going to have with the client? Remember that little piece at the end that I said that I wanted to reserve for scope creep? I also reserve it for follow-up and for support, because just because we declare that we've gone live, it doesn't mean that everyone is up and running just yet. So there's going to need to be some type of post-go live support that's going to be required. And that's what the follow-up is for. And then also we look at any ongoing staff augmentation. So for instance, if the project team that I'm working on is now moving on to a different project and they don't have the capacity to manage their new massive Smartsheet solution, then we can offer as consultants staff augmentation, which means we can put someone in their organization that's responsible for the solution that we just built, is responsible for administrating the solution. So whether it's keeping up with any changes that need to happen in Control Center, keeping up with changes to their project blueprints, or adding things to resource management, which is another premium application, or just simply adding additional functionality as people find it in the organization and they want to add it to Smartsheet. We can provide those types of services with staff augmentation. From your perspective, you're going to need to know who your administrative team is going to be moving forward after go live. That's the purpose of this for you. If you are previewing Smartsheet Simplified, this is going to be the end of your preview. But if you're an elite member, then you can move on to the next module.